So I hope that you have had a pleasant lunch and that you are really ready to hear about information and cybersecurity, even if it doesn't sound like the most, yeah,
Nothing. Oh, never mind.
most fun topic, but I will do my best to make it more interesting. So, yeah, a little bit about my background that Christopher explained. I work at Keto Compliance as a senior quality and regulatory affairs consultant and have worked with small companies, big organizations, governmental organizations. And I think I have a good portfolio from different types of companies, which brings a lot of examples and real life experience to my presentation today. So yeah, let's dig into the information and cybersecurity in regulated industries. So this is what our agenda looks like today, and we will start by looking into this has a timer, into regulated industries and why we need to have compliance. So uh, we know that we need to fulfill certain requirements, but what is it that defines what types of requirements and which regulations and standards we need to consider and fulfill? So I would say it depends a lot on which market you are making your device available on. So is it in Europe? Is it in Asia? Is it in the US? So some regulations are continent specific, market specific, and then you also have some country specific laws in some countries, but there are also other applicable requirements, other applicable standards that can be harmonized with the regulations for that specific market or not, but they depend a lot. They depend a lot on the device type and the characteristic of your device. And that is important to know, that you need to fulfill those requirements as well and consider those standards as well. And yeah, but let's ask a question to ourselves. So why do we think that regulatory compliance is necessary? Why is it essential? I
I
think
don't know why it's doing that. Sorry.
okay.
It should be a timer.
Uh,
You're back
should I
on.
go
Yeah,
ahead?
that's
Yeah.
fine. Go ahead.
Okay. So I have tried to go to the bare minimum level here and just really put up the most essential uh, aspects when I try to answer this question. And I think it's mostly because we want to have safe and secure devices on our market. We want to have high qualitative products. And we also strive for transparency in the organizations. We want to have organizations where they have documents and documentation that demonstrates how the workflow works in the company and how the technical documentation can demonstrate the safety and quality of the device. But also we think that the standards and regulations are kind of a guideline or instruction as well, because they set up the requirements for us, which means that they are setting up the framework for our work and how we should work within our industry. And if you come from the life science industry, for example, you know that in the history you have had a lot of deviations and failures for devices which led to customer or patient harm, and that is something that we want to avoid as well, to protect the customers. In this case, it will be the data, the information for the customer. And it's also good to have a common industry standard for all the organizations within a industry. And if we move forward, um, so when we work with information and cybersecurity, there are some key definitions and some key terms that you a lot of time hear and that you need to consider. So I have actually 3 definitions here that I wanted to.
I'm very
Yes,
sorry.
no, no worry.
We don't know there's
I
no
think
setting
I
on there.
know.
We're not.
Give me 1 second.
We
Okay,
apologize.
we pause it. It's okay
Is there a setting on there that's causing it?
because
No,
it
I
wasn't.
think it should be. I don't know.
Okay.
Sorry about it.
It's fine. All right. Where are we? Yeah, the key terms. So we have actually three definitions here. We have the confidentiality, we have integrity, and we have availability. And these are a kind of the core values of information and cybersecurity as well. We want to have a system that have actually high integrity, which means that the data the system is providing and handling is correct, and that it cannot be modified if it's not intended to be modified. We want to have high confidentiality, which means that we want to prevent unauthorized access to the data. And the data should also be available when the user wants or need to use the data and the system. So these three core definitions and values will come back to you whenever you work with the cybersecurity and information security, either if it's in your quality management system or risk management or post-market surveillance activities. So yeah, that's okay. And here you see another list or some other description of terms and definitions. And why do I have this slide here? Because I think a lot of these words are words that are pretty common in our daily life. We are pretty used to hear this word attack, asset, threat, and we have an interpretation of these words. But the interpretation that we have and that we use in our daily life doesn't necessarily match the description and interpretation from the standards. So, with that said, I would say it's very important to make sure that you have a correct understanding of these terms and make sure that your interpretation and your understanding actually matches what is written in the standard and regulation. If you're working with life science, then I think this standard you can see up there is applicable for you. If you are working in another industry, just make sure that you have created a correct understanding of necessary terms. And if we move on, yeah, so now we will take a deeper look into information and cybersecurity. So, what is information and cybersecurity? Usually, when you have a software, you have a set of data, a set of information, you have networks, clouds, you have different layers in your system, and the intention of these type of security is to protect it from unauthorized access, use, disclosure, disruption, modification, or destruction. And once again, we bounce back to the three core values. And the intention to protect the data from this is to have high integrity, high confidentiality, and have a system that is available for the user. So once again, we bounce back to the core values and try to keep these three definitions in your mind when you're working with information and cybersecurity. So on this slide we have a list of essential activities, and I mean this list can be much longer but I have tried to gather the really bare minimum essential activities, and because we have only 20 minutes, I think we will not manage to go through them all, but I have tried to pick three of them that I think is most important, but also the ones that most of the companies miss a lot of time. And if you look at the flow chart here to the right, it says that the cybersecurity and information security actually affects the product development, the risk management, and post-market surveillance. And with that said, I would like to kind of remind you of it is very important to implement the requirements for information and cybersecurity already in your quality management system, in your procedures, in order to avoid mistakes and failures in a later phase. But let's move on and take a look at the three activities that I have picked.
Next slide.
Yeah. So threat modeling. that is something that is a proactive activity, and this is performed during the early development phase, where you basically it's kind of the same approach as for the risk assessment. You come up with threats, you come up with scenarios and consequences for your system. You decompose your design into different parts. You start to check the vulnerability of each part, and you start to identify control measures thereby and connect those to your risk assessment as well. So this is something that you can do pretty early in your design and development phase. And if we move forward to the next slide, we have the penetration testing. For those of you who doesn't know what penetration testing means, it's actually a simulated cyber attack that is performed by external parts, usually, that doesn't know your system or strengths or vulnerability of your system. They plan to do this simulation. They start to scan your system, get to know your system, and then they will try to gain access. Once they have access, they will try to maintain the access. And once they're done, they will provide a report where they analyze your system and where they point out the real-time risks, the vulnerabilities, the gaps, and also suggestion for control measures and mitigation. So this is actually a very powerful method to have a secure system. And the third activity, if we move on, is the vulnerability management or vulnerability scannings, as some call it. And in this scenario, you are having a reactive approach. You have released your software, you have released a certain version, and you start to actually go through each layer of your system, and you start to do your risk assessment on those and identify vulnerable points in each layer. And this is not like the threat modeling, because in this scenario you are handling threats and risks that are actually there after you have released your device. So think about it. You can have a proactive approach, a reactive approach, and of course the best scenario is to have both. And and it should be connected to your risk assessment, and you should find appropriate risk control measures for the vulnerable points of your system. We have mentioned risk assessment and how it should be connected to each method, but this slide shows, actually, for those of you who work within life science, you can see that we can see two boxes here to the right, where we have ISO 14971, the risk management standard for patient safety, and then we have the box to the left where we have security risk management. And this slide wants to visualize that you actually need to have a process for security risk management. Either you can have it separately from the patient safety risk management procedure, or you can integrate and merge the requirements for the security risk management into your existing risk management process and file. But the important and main point here is to look into the requirements and apply the requirements, implement them in your risk management process. And if we move forward, here I have tried to list some common pitfalls that we at Key to Compliance have seen when we work with our customers. So the first one is that they doesn't have any data flow diagram. And a data flow diagram actually is a visualization of how information flows into different layers, different parts of your system. And if you don't have a proper data flow diagram, it will be very hard to identify and do threats or do your vulnerability scanning, because you cannot see exactly how information is going through each layer. What we talked about, either they don't have any risk management file or that it's insufficient. Bad security concept. The security concept is not well communicated, it's not implemented in the procedures. Uh, there's lack of training, expertise. This is something that we see very often. Just as anything else, the information and cybersecurity is an expertise, and you need to have experts that can help you train the company and guide you through this path. And the three activities that I mentioned earlier, these are also aspects that we see as gaps or poorly done parts when we meet our customers. And if we move forward, okay, now we have talked about activities, we have talked about risks, we have talked about the concept of information and cybersecurity. How do we manage this? What is the best approach? And once again, even here, this can be a very long list, but I have tried to consider the overall image for a project and not only focus on the information and cybersecurity. So I think that it's important to identify and implement the correct applicable standards and regulation. That is very important because it will kind of set out the structure and framework for your system, for your procedures, for your documentation. And if you do it wrongly, you then need to go back and correct it afterwards. So try to either use internal experts or external to do this correctly. And the next one, use experts, SMEs. And do it right from the start. Because regardless to if it's information and cybersecurity or if it's just project management, it will always cost you more to implement changes and correct something in a later phase. And include the regulatory compliance and the security activities in your initial budget. Because we know that regulatory compliance and security activities, they will cost time, resource, and this means that they will cost money. So count on it in order to avoid budget shortness. Train and educate the staff at your company, create awareness, think smart, smart processes, risk-based approach, plan, do, check. You need to measure your output, you need to improve your processes, and it's always good to have a risk-based approach. And if we go to our next slide, some common standards. I actually don't know if all of us here are working within life science industry, but this is just an example of some applicable standards and regulation. But once again, you need to actually identify the applicable standards for your device, for your company, based on the characteristic of your device and the market that you are selling your device in. But this is just an example. But in the next slide, I have actually, in here I have tried to keep it very general. So I would say these regulations and standards for EU and US will apply to any kind of software, regardless to if it's a medical device or not. These are pretty general standards and regulation that you need to consider if you have a software. So consider these depending on the market and identify other applicable standards for your device connected to the characteristic, and I think you will have a good framework. And I think that was actually it from my side. Thank you for listening.